The moment I stepped into Chancellor Adrian Keaton's office, I realized I had entered a world I didn't belong to. Everything in that room, dark mahogany shelves, crystal decanter on the sideboard, muted sunlight falling across perfectly aligned papers, spoke of control and quiet power, and I was shaking. I shouldn't have been there. I was a graduate assistant, a nobody from a small-town community college who'd clawed her way into a master's program through scholarships and sleepless nights. But when Professor Hammond said the Chancellor's letter could make or break my fellowship application, I swallowed my pride and made the appointment. I needed that letter more than anything. "Come in," came the low, commanding voice from inside. I opened the door carefully. He stood by the tall window overlooking the autumn courtyard, Chancellor Adrian Keaton. His black shirt, collar open just enough to reveal a trace of skin, contrasted against the pale daylight pouring in. He turned at the sound of the door, eyes sharp, assessing. "Miss Lane." His voice held both recognition and restraint. "Sit down." I perched on the edge of the leather chair opposite his desk, the scent of coffee and polished wood filling the air. My hands clutched the folder that held my resume, transcripts, and project proposal. "I appreciate you seeing me, sir," I began softly. "I'm applying for the Addison Fellowship at Stanford. They require a reference from the Chancellor for top research applicants. Professor Hammond said you might—" "I only write letters for students I've personally supervised," he interrupted, folding his arms. "You and I haven't worked together." The words landed like a verdict. I'd expected resistance, but not the kind that felt personal. "I understand," I managed, trying to steady my voice. "But I've done a year of archival research on early American political writings. Your area of expertise. I thought if I showed you my work." He studied me, his expression unreadable. "And why this fellowship?" I blinked. "Sir? Why not stay here? Why not finish your degree quietly and apply later?" His tone was calm, but there was something beneath it, a curiosity tinged with skepticism. "Because," I said carefully, "I need to leave." That caught his attention. He leaned forward slightly. "Need to?" My throat tightened. I wasn't used to talking about my life. My parents' small-town bookstore barely stayed open. My younger brother was still recovering from an accident that had drained what little savings we had. The fellowship wasn't ambition. It was escape. "I'm from a small town in Wyoming," I said finally. "No one there leaves. My mother always said education was my way out. I just can't go back without proving she was right." He didn't respond immediately. His gaze flicked down to my resume, then to the plain chain around my neck. I realized, too late, that I was twisting it nervously between my fingers. "You've never asked for help before, have you?" The question made me look up. "No, sir," he exhaled quietly, setting my folder aside. "That's evident, but it also makes me question something." "What?" "Whether this request is about the fellowship, or about running from something." His voice softened on the last words, but they struck like lightning. I froze, unsure whether to deny or defend. "I'm not running," I whispered. He tilted his head, studying me with unsettling precision. "Good, because running rarely ends well. You'll learn that." I didn't know what he meant, but I felt stripped bare under that gaze, as if he'd peeled away every polished sentence I'd prepared and was staring straight at the uncertainty underneath. He finally broke the silence. "Leave your materials with my assistant. I'll review them." I stood, nodding quickly. "Thank you, Chancellor Keaton. I appreciate your time." I was halfway to the door when he added, almost as an afterthought, "You work in the archives, correct?" "Yes." "Professor Hammond mentioned you've been cataloging the university's original correspondence collection. I'd like to see your notes." I turned back, confused. "My notes?" He gave a faint smile. "I prefer to understand a researcher's mind before I endorse their potential." It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge. For the next week, I told myself it didn't matter whether he liked me or not. But every time I passed the administration building, I found myself glancing at his office window, wondering if he'd read my file. Then, one morning, I received an email. "Miss Lane, I've reviewed your work. Join me at the Chancellor's office at 3 p.m. We need to discuss your research integrity." Adrian Keaton integrity. The word hit like a slap. When I entered his office again that afternoon, he was at his desk, reading through my annotated transcriptions. He didn't look up right away. Did you copy these notes from the Hammond archives? He asked finally. My heart dropped. No, of course not. Every note is my own work. He leaned back, watching me. You cite secondary sources properly, but your commentary on the 1830 correspondence matches phrasing I've seen in Hammond's private papers. I swallowed hard. That's because he reviewed my drafts. He corrected some of my language. He said it was too emotional. Emotional, he repeated almost to himself. And he removed your voice in the process. I frowned. Sir? He stood, walking toward the window again, sunlight brushing across his profile. I can see your mind in these notes, Miss Lane. Sharp, observant, but also afraid of being wrong. Afraid of being seen? My pulse hammered. I'm just trying to do things the right way. He turned, meeting my gaze. That's your mistake. You equate safe with right. I stared at him, unsure whether he was criticizing or protecting me. He came closer, resting one hand on the desk between us. You remind me of myself when I was your age, except I had no one to question my caution. I didn't know what to say. His proximity made it hard to breathe, not because of attraction, but because of the gravity in his eyes. Like he saw a version of me I hadn't yet dared to meet. He took a deep breath. I'll write your letter, I blinked. You will? With a condition. My throat tightened. What kind of condition? I want you to assist me with the Chancellor's Centennial Project. Archival review, historical synthesis, narrative drafting. You'll be here 3 afternoons a week. I hesitated. Working directly under him, it felt dangerous. He continued. You'll have full access to the restricted archives. You'll learn more in 3 months than most graduate students in 3 years. And if I say no, then I can't in good conscience endorse a student I don't truly know. The silence stretched. The offer was impossible to refuse, yet my instinct screamed that stepping into his world meant exposing parts of myself I'd carefully hidden. He saw my hesitation and added, more softly, You wanted to prove your mother right, didn't you? Then stop being afraid of being seen. Something in me cracked then. Not submission, but surrender to possibility. I drew in a breath and said quietly, All right. I'll do it. For the first time, a faint warmth touched his expression. Good. We start tomorrow. As I walked out of his office, sunlight spilling across the marble floor, I felt a strange pull between fear and curiosity. I had come seeking a letter. Instead, I had agreed to let Adrian Keaton rewrite my future, in his own exacting way. The first week working under Chancellor Keaton felt like stepping into an entirely different rhythm of life, one measured by precision, silence and the slow hum of intellect. His office, once intimidating, became a second world. Sunlight across old books, faint scent of leather and ink, and the sound of his low voice guiding, questioning, dissecting ideas until truth was all that remained. He never spoke unnecessarily, but when he did, it was impossible not to listen. Every afternoon, I sat across from him at the long oak table surrounded by files and drafts. My task was to help curate historical letters for the Centennial Project, a massive publication that would capture the university's founding spirit. But soon I realized he wasn't just testing my research ability, he was testing me. Don't summarize the correspondence, he said one day, his tone patient but firm. Read between it. The emotions, the contradictions, that's where the truth hides. I frowned, scanning the letter I'd been annotating. You mean informative? He looked up, and for the first time that week, smiled faintly. Good. You're learning to listen to silence. I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt seen in a way I wasn't ready for. By the second week, the dynamic between us had shifted subtly. He'd stopped calling me Miss Lane. It was just Ivy now, though the way he said it carried an odd gravity. Careful, deliberate, as if the name itself deserved reverence. And I'd stopped calling him Chancellor Keaton, despite my instinct for formality. He'd insisted once, quietly but firmly, titles create distance. We don't need that here. So it became Adrian, a word that felt far too intimate in my mouth. He never crossed a line, not once. But there was something charged in the air between us, something unspoken that lingered in every pause. It showed in small ways, The way his hand brushed mine when passing a file. The way he lingered just a moment too long after correcting my phrasing, or how his gaze would soften when I laughed. Rarely. But honestly, I hadn't laughed much in years. One afternoon, I stayed late to finish a transcription. Adrian was still there, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, working through documents in complete concentration. The sunset filtered through the blinds, gold streaks cutting across his face and the black shirt he always seemed to wear. "You should go home, Ivy," he murmured without looking up. "I just want to finish this section," I said. "The Chancellor's 1893 address. It's beautifully written." He leaned back, studying me. "You appreciate words too much for a researcher," I smiled faintly. "Words are how I survive." Something flickered in his expression, curiosity tinged with sadness. "And what do you need to survive from?" My pen froze mid-sentence. "You ask questions like you already know the answers. Only the ones that matter." The room felt heavier then, thick with quiet and late sunlight. I finally whispered, "My father used to tell me I was too naive to survive the real world." Maybe he was right, Adrian's gaze darkened. Naivety and goodness aren't the same thing. Don't confuse them, the way he said it, like a warning, but also a confession, sent a strange warmth through me. When I finally gathered my papers to leave, he said quietly, "You're not naive, Ivy. You just haven't been allowed to choose who you want to be yet." That night, his words echoed long after I'd left campus. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a strange rhythm. He challenged every assumption I'd ever held about scholarship, about myself. When I hesitated, he pushed. When I grew frustrated, he waited. Sometimes we worked in silence for hours, our proximity saying more than words could. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the horizon, sunlight still filtering weakly through the clouds. He was reading one of my drafts, brow furrowed, when he said abruptly, "You hide emotion behind academic phrasing." "Why?" I stared at the page. "Because emotion makes people dismissive. Especially men in authority." He looked up sharply. "I'm not dismissive." "No," I said softly. "You're different, but you're rare." That silenced him. Then, almost inaudibly, he said, "Rare isn't always good." There was something behind that. A shadow. I wanted to ask, but his expression made it clear that door was closed. Still, something shifted between us that day. He began to tell me small things about himself. About how he'd become Chancellor at 38 after his mentor's sudden death, how he'd once been married to another academic, and how that ended when she accused him of valuing ambition more than affection. "She wasn't wrong," he said quietly one afternoon, staring out the window. "Control is easier than vulnerability." I watched him in that moment, this man so revered, so self-contained, and felt a painful tenderness rise in me. "Maybe," I said, "but you can't rewrite loneliness with discipline." He turned to me then, and the look in his eyes made my breath catch. For a moment, it felt like we were standing on the edge of something dangerous and beautiful. He took a slow breath. "You're braver than you think, Ivy." And I realized then that he wasn't just teaching me history. He was teaching me how to stop hiding from myself. Weeks passed. The Centennial Project neared completion, and I found myself dreading the day it would end. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. I'd fallen ill. Nothing serious, just exhaustion and a fever that wouldn't break. I didn't want to cancel our session, but when I showed up pale and shivering, Adrian's expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low but laced with concern. "I'm fine," I lied, sitting down at the table. "I can work through it." He came around to my side, kneeling slightly to meet my eyes. "You can barely keep them open." "I just didn't want to disappoint you," I whispered before I could stop myself. Something in his expression broke then. His composure, his distance. "Ivy." He stood, walked to his sideboard, poured a glass of water, and handed it to me. His hand brushed mine briefly. "Warm, steady. Drink," he said. "Then go home." But when I tried to stand, the room tilted. He caught me before I fell, one strong arm steadying my waist. For a heartbeat, we stood frozen, his breath near my temple, my hands gripping his arm. The moment stretched thin and fragile like glass about to shatter. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "Don't be." His voice was hushed now. "You've done more than enough." He guided me to the sofa, then pulled a blanket from the back of his chair. "Rest a minute before you go. I'll drive you home." "I can't ask you to—" "You didn't." He sat across from me as I rested, his gaze unreadable but soft. I'd never seen him this close, this unguarded. The fever blurred my thoughts, but I remember whispering, "You don't let people close, do you?" He hesitated, then answered quietly, "No, it's safer that way." "Then why are you letting me?" He didn't answer, just looked at me for a long, silent moment, long enough that I saw the ache behind his restraint. Finally, he said, "Because I can't seem to stop." The words hung between us, unspoken and yet undeniable. I fell asleep to the sound of rain somewhere in the distance and the quiet rhythm of his breathing nearby. When I woke, I was back in my apartment, my coat draped neatly over a chair, a note on the table written in his precise hand. "You don't need to prove your worth, Ivy. It's already visible to anyone who dares to look." The next day at the university, he avoided my eyes during our meeting. The easy rhythm we'd built was gone, replaced by tension sharp enough to feel in the air. At the end of the session, he finally said without looking at me, "The letter will be ready next week." Something inside me sank. "Is that it then?" He looked up. For the first time, his composure fractured. "It's better this way, better?" I echoed. He stepped closer but stopped halfway, his voice low. "You make me forget the boundaries that keep me intact." I stared at him, my chest tight. "And you make me want to break mine." Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke again. But as I walked out of his office, my heart ached with the certainty that something fragile and real had begun, and that one of us was about to ruin it. The week after that night of unspoken truth was the longest of my life. Adrian kept his distance, as though he'd drawn a clean line through the air and commanded both of us to stay behind it. Our meetings became shorter, colder. He spoke only of deadlines and formatting, his tone clipped, polite. I told myself I was fine, that this was what I'd wanted from the start. A letter, a future, not a man who had learned to hide behind discipline. But it was a lie that grew heavier by the day. The letter arrived in my inbox 3 days before the Centennial Project's completion. It was immaculate, professionally worded, glowing, and yet painfully impersonal. The kind of letter that could open every door but left my heart closed and aching. I printed it, held it for a long moment, and then walked to his office. The door was open. He was standing by the window again, as if that was where all his thoughts lived. The sunlight hit the edge of his face, outlining the exhaustion he'd tried to hide. "I got your letter," I said softly. He didn't turn. "Good. It should serve you well." "It will," I admitted. "But it doesn't sound like you." He exhaled, low and tight. "It's not supposed to sound like me, Ivy. It's supposed to sound like a chancellor's endorsement." "Then maybe that's the problem," I whispered. "Because the man who taught me to stop hiding behind safety wouldn't write something this safe." He turned then, sharply, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're playing a dangerous game." "I'm not playing anything," I said, stepping closer. "You made me believe my thoughts mattered, that my voice mattered. And now you're telling me that was all part of a lesson plan?" He flinched slightly, the first sign of emotion cracking through. "You don't understand the weight of reputation, Ivy. One rumor, one wrong interpretation, everything I've built could vanish." "I'm not a rumor," I said. Silence. He closed his eyes briefly, then said, "No, you're the truth I don't know how to live with." Something inside me broke open then. "I never wanted to ruin your career," I whispered. "I just wanted to thank you. You made me see myself differently. You made me feel differently." His jaw tensed. "That's exactly why I can't—" The phone on his desk rang, cutting through the air. He ignored it. For a long moment, Neither of us moved. When it stopped ringing, I said quietly, "I'm leaving tonight for San Francisco. They moved the fellowship interview earlier." He looked at me, startled. "Tonight?" "Yes, I wasn't going to say goodbye. But then I realized I couldn't leave without telling you that you changed me, Adrian." His name fell from my lips softly, reverently, like a confession. For a heartbeat, I saw the restraint in him collapse. His shoulders dropped, his eyes closed as if surrendering to something inevitable. He whispered, "You shouldn't say my name like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me forget who I'm supposed to be." I took a small step closer, trembling but resolute. "Then forget." He stared at me, every muscle in his face tight with conflict. I thought he would step back. Instead, he did the opposite. He reached for me slowly, as though asking permission without words. His hand brushed a strand of hair from my face. The warmth of his fingers lingered, burning through every layer of hesitation I'd ever built. "I shouldn't," he murmured, his voice rough. "I know." We stood there, suspended in a silence that felt holy. Then, instead of kissing me, he did something even more intimate. He rested his forehead against mine, eyes closed, breathing me in like a man who had been starving for years and didn't know how to begin again. It wasn't passion. It was surrender. That night, I boarded the flight to San Francisco. The city lights blurred beneath the plane as I watched from the window seat, his voice echoing in my mind. Every part of me felt pulled between gratitude and loss. The fellowship interview went well. They praised my research, my clarity, my insight. I said all the right words, but they didn't sound like me anymore. They sounded like him, steady, articulate, fearless. When it was over, I stepped outside into the California sunlight and realized something simple yet profound. I didn't need the fellowship to prove my worth. He had already shown me what belief could look like. A week later, I returned to campus for the centennial ceremony. It was the culmination of everything we'd worked for. The unveiling of the project. The presentation of the restored letters. He saw me the moment I entered the grand hall. His expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker of recognition, the subtle shift in his stance. He was dressed impeccably, as always, but his eyes betrayed the quiet chaos beneath his composure. I watched him give his address, eloquent, measured, every word deliberate. He spoke about history, integrity, and the courage to preserve truth. But when his gaze drifted briefly toward me in the crowd, the meaning changed. He wasn't just talking about history anymore. He was talking about us. After the ceremony, I found him alone in his office, removing his cufflinks in silence. "You came back," he said without turning. "I told you I would." He smiled faintly. "You could have sent an email." "I could have," I agreed. "But some goodbyes deserve to be spoken." He turned then, leaning against the desk. "And what if I'm not ready to say goodbye?" My heart stuttered. "Then what are you ready for?" He crossed the distance slowly, his gaze searching mine. "To stop pretending that protecting you means pushing you away." I swallowed hard. "You don't need to protect me." He gave a small, almost broken laugh. "You think this is about you?" He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I've lived half my life believing control was strength. Then you walked in asking for a letter, and suddenly I couldn't tell where my restraint ended and my fear began." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You weren't afraid of me, Adrian. You were afraid of what I made you feel." He nodded once, the admission heavy between us. "And now? Now I'm not afraid anymore," I whispered. The distance closed. This time when he touched my face, there was no hesitation. His thumb brushed a tear from my cheek before he kissed me. Slowly, reverently, like a man rewriting every rule he'd ever lived by. The world seemed to still around us. There was no university, no titles, no fear. Just the quiet miracle of finding something worth risking everything for. When the kiss broke, I rested my head against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. He whispered, "You deserve a future bigger than this campus, Ivy." "Maybe," I said softly. "But right now, I just want to stand still for a moment. With you." He smiled then, a real smile, one that erased years of self-discipline and solitude. Then stay. And I did. Later that night, as we sat by the window in his office, the same one where I'd once begged for a letter, the world outside felt quieter, softer. The project was complete. My fellowship awaited, but for the first time, I wasn't running toward anything. He traced the edge of my hand with his fingers, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. "You know," he said quietly, "when you first walked in here, I thought you were another student trying to use my name to climb." I laughed softly. "And now I realize you were the one thing that made me remember what my name used to mean." I looked at him, really looked, and saw not the Chancellor, not the scholar, but the man who had finally allowed himself to be human. He reached into the drawer, pulled out a small envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a single page, his handwritten letter, the one he hadn't sent. "To the Addison Fellowship Committee, Miss Ivy Lane is the rare kind of mind that reminds those around her why truth matters. Her integrity humbles intellect, and her presence restores faith and purpose. Endorsing her is not an act of duty, but of gratitude." Adrian Keaton tears blurred the words. "This is the letter I meant to write," he said. But I was too afraid. I reached for his hand. "Then let's not be afraid anymore." He nodded slowly, and for a long while, we sat in silence. Two souls who had finally stopped running from themselves. The next morning, sunlight poured into his office. The same light that had once made me feel small now felt like a beginning. As I left the campus gates, I turned once to see him standing at his window, watching. For the first time, I didn't feel like a student seeking permission. I felt like a woman standing in her own truth. He had rewritten my future, not through a letter, but through belief. And I had rewritten his, not through defiance, but through love. When I smiled, he raised his hand in silent farewell, the kind that meant everything had already been said. In his world of measured words and unbroken order, I had been the disruption he didn't expect, and he, the certainty I'd spent my whole life searching for. And for both of us, that was enough. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in quiet, transformative love. Tell me in the comments, what was your favorite line? Did you believe Adrian would let her go? Your words help our stories find more hearts that still believe in emotional, slow-burn love. Subscribe for more heart-tugging romances where powerful men fall for the innocence that changes them forever.